Welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm your host, Samantha, and I'm so pleased you're here. As an education business owner myself and a former teacher, I understand the nuances that only apply to us. So in this podcast, I share fluff-free, tailored and actionable ideas that you can mould to suit your needs. If you'd like to take this conversation further, please do reach out. I would love to meet you. And finally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. That way, you'll be helping me help more people. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy. Hi, Anne. Welcome to the podcast. So pleased to have you. Anne, would you quickly introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Samantha. Yeah, lovely to be here. Absolutely brilliant. So, my name's Anne Morris. I am the founder and CEO of the slightly oddly named Yipiyap. I'll come to that in a second. But basically, Yipiyap recruits and employs peer tutors to work in schools during the school day. So it's a slightly different tutoring model than a private tuition model. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But yes, Yipiyap stands for Young Inspiring People, Inspiring Young Aspiring People. So we needed a name that was really catchy for reasons I can come on to later. But this is kind of where we landed. And yeah, so peer tutoring is what we do. We've been doing that for 12 years now. So we're into our 13th year working with schools. And my background is I was a secondary maths teacher. And really, what I have set up is the sort of thing that I would have wanted when I was teaching in the classroom, peer mentor with me in the classroom, or perhaps deployed, taking out small groups of children to go and work with, and sort of working with them on areas where you can really build all those skills that tutoring naturally leans into, such as gaps in their learning and building their confidence. And this is really where we've come from.
So is that when the idea came to you while you were teaching?
So no. So I taught for some years and then left to go into accountancy. So I worked for KPMG for a few years. Became a mum at that point, not long after that, and I was a bit of a serial entrepreneur a little bit during that time as well. So Yipiyap isn't my first business. I started two other businesses before Yipiyap. And that sort of gave me the grounding. I think you can make all my mistakes doing that and then eventually get to start Yipiyap. So no, it was a lot later down the line when I had three children, and it was when the youngest was just getting into juniors that I was able to sort of start Yipiyap and went from there. And the real catalyst for it was this. So I don't know if you can see a little newspaper article, which is on the wall behind me. But basically, I was sitting at home having my lunch one day. Lunchtime news came on, and there was an article about numeracy standards of adults in the UK, and basically saying that 50% of adults in the UK have the maths ability of an 11-year-old. So in other words, secondary school maths has made no difference to half the adult population. And I just found this really horrifying. And I suppose most times you'd sort of look at something like that and say, oh, well, that's terrible, and just move on and get on with the rest of your day. But on this particular occasion, I just thought, it sort of got my brain going really and thinking, well, how could we change that? How could we do something to make that better? So that's really, wasn't while I was in teaching at all. It was much longer after.
So when you saw that, what made you think that you would go down the peer mentoring route and not, let's say, the traditional tutoring route?
So I guess, I don't know, I sort of take myself back to that time, which is quite a long time ago now, and think what my actual thought process was. I have wondered a number of times over the years quite how I made that leap. I think I'd recognise, so I'm the maths teacher, so to take things back a little bit, as a maths teacher, so when you are a maths teacher, and I'm sure many of your listeners will relate to this, I'm sure for English as well, but sort of my experiences in maths, you never get away from it in terms of people going, oh, can you just help so-and-so? Oh, can you just do this? Oh, there's somebody just needs a bit of help with their maths. That's a really well-trodden path. So I had done some very informal tutoring, literally for friends. I hadn't set myself up as a tutor. It's literally just people who'd asked over the years. So I knew the benefits that it could have. And just as I was at this point when the article came out, I was tutoring a friend's daughter who, shouldn't have really had any problems looking at her sort of, the sort of presentation of how she was. You wouldn't have thought she'd had really low confidence in maths, but she did. And I think it just chimed in with that. I could really tell that tutoring was going to work to help support people. But it's just a case of how do you get enough tutors in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And I think probably I just was thinking about what sort of group could you pull together? How could you get a group of people together rather than recruiting lots of people individually? And how could you reach those people who tutoring wasn't available to otherwise? I think this is probably what drove it, actually. Yeah. So, private tutoring is clearly something which certain families can afford and others can't. And so how could we reach those students where they wouldn't be able to access this tutoring any other way, because those people are far more likely to be falling through this net of getting to adulthood and not being numeracy confident. So I thought, how could we get into schools? If you're thinking about schools, you're always thinking about budgets and how tight the budgets are. And I think I just kind of felt like this idea of peer mentoring and the relatability of peer mentors was just going to add a different slant to it, really. So yeah, I just kind of started down that route, and that's just where it took me. I suppose it kind of chimed once I got started and started talking to people, doing initial research. And then it just seemed to be something that flew once it got going.
So I want to ask you why you specifically decided to offer this to schools and not to independent families. But before I do, I think a couple of things that's really apparent is that your why is so strong. You're so clear from day one. You've been very clear on the impact that you want to make. And I think this is important because something that came up yesterday in the mastermind, I ran this group class sales clinic, and someone said, so I kind of want to run groups, but I don't really enjoy teaching groups. But I also know that through doing just one-to-one tuition, it's not very future-proofed. There's a cap on how much I can earn and everything like that. And something that, a conversation we had was, well, as a tutor, running groups or hiring tutors aren't your only two options for a business. And what I encouraged her to do was really to crystallize the impact she wants to make first, and then think about all the different ways she could actually make that impact. And it can be outside of tutoring, even. And I think that, everything you're saying is actually really poignant. It's really important, I think, for tutors to hear, because we may start from a certain point. We may start by doing a little bit of tuition, for example. But actually, you can be quite creative about where you take your business and the model that you follow. And, it all boils down to the impact you want to make. And I know that you launched, is it called Peer Scroller?
Yes, yes.
And that's still very in line with your why, isn't it?
Yes, so we're going to talk about peer scroller a little bit, but I want to sort of stick on the why just for a minute, if that's okay, because I
Of
think that's
course.
really pertinent. Um, when you run a business, I think there's often, because obviously this is my third attempt at a business, so I've kind of been down this road a little bit before, but I think you sort of value the why, which really keeps you on track. And I've never set something up as a sole trader, so I've never done that in that way. But I can imagine the keeping on track and keeping your sort of guiding star, if you like, front and center is really important. But when you're starting a business and you sort of think of it in those terms, you are thinking of business plan, having a mission, having this sort of thing, which kind of ties everything together right at the start. You need to know why you're setting up this business in the first place. Like you say, tutoring, people get drawn into sometimes quite gradually because they're good at it. Like I could have done, I suppose, with these friends and people who were asking me, I could have gone a little bit more down that route. But I wanted to start a business, and therefore you sort of have this structure of things that you need to do. You need to set up, you need to incorporate, you need to have finances kind of sorted, and systems for things quite quickly and processes in place quite quickly. And so I think for people who don't necessarily have that structure, that sort of legal structure, it doesn't necessarily take away from the benefits of thinking in those terms and having those benefits of having a mission and thinking about why you are doing what you're doing. And for us, it was always about having every learner have access to take control of their educational journey. This is something that's quite key to us. We don't tend to have it in terms of we're going to get these outcomes. It's about having learners feel empowered that they are in control, because a lot of the students that we work with come from quite disadvantaged backgrounds, because we work with schools and through their pupil premium funding, which is often those children who are coming from a little bit more of a disadvantaged background. And therefore, having them have access and empowerment to decide their educational journey rather than feeling that they haven't got that empowerment was really important to us. And so that's something which if they want to do math, they should have access to math. If they want to be good at things, they should be able to get that help and support and be good at them in the end. So it's really about things coming from the learner, and for us to be able to sort of help them along their way with that. And that's really what our mission's all about.
Yeah.
Peer scroller, just to touch on that briefly. So I suppose, having been in this sphere for 12 years now, we do consider ourselves the peer tutoring experts. Not many people work with peer tutors in this sort of way that we do. So we recruit young people to be our tutors who they are typically coming out of school, having just done their A-levels. So they are 18 or 19 years of age. Well, they're 18 when they join us typically, and they're 19 by the time they finish. And what Peer Scroller does is offer a different service around PSHE. So schools really recognise the power of peer mentoring in various guises. If you have a school with a sixth form, for instance, quite often you'll buddy up sixth formers with students lower down the school. But if you haven't got that, then that's where our tutoring comes in. But Peer Scroller sort of takes that peer dynamic, if you like, and really allows it to speak on a different level in terms of helping PSHE, because Peer Scroller looks like TikTok. It's like a clean, safe version of TikTok. It's not social media at all. It's scripted and delivered and filmed, but it has a really authentic feel about it, and it does sort of give that sort of sense of relatable peers talking to younger people and not advising, even just giving information and starting a conversation and allowing those young people to sort of explore in a safe place some of the ideas around PSHE, which they may find all sorts online which they don't want to find, and therefore it gives a safer place to do that. But yeah, it's all still ties in very much to our heart of the relationship between peer mentors and the learners that they're trying to work with.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said that regardless of whether you're a limited company, a sole trader, it's almost it's almost a moot point, because the main thing is that you're very clear on your why. Why are you doing what you want to do? Because I'm an English tutor and there are hundreds and thousands of English tutors, but each one of us sort of specialize in connecting with students in a slightly different way. And I think if you can really identify that, and it can be quite hard to really crystallize that, but when you do, then it unlocks so many opportunities, because you realize how many different ways you can still make that impact. So what led to your decision to offer this? I mean, if we just take the peer scroller out of it, just because it's quite new and it's related to PSHE, but if we take Yipiyap, then what was your decision? What steered your decision to offer this specifically to schools and not to, families?
So, well, firstly, schools was sort of where I came from, is in my blood, really, and that's I could go into schools and be credible. I was looking for, I guess, a market that was not, I suppose, just a little bit different. I suppose I was looking for a little bit of a different angle, and somebody who's really quite driven by ideas and new concept, and seeing a bit of proof of concept, trying to prove those concepts and see if they work. I'd had this before in one of my previous businesses, which was to do with, I'll just very, very briefly, was to do with homemade organic baby food. So I was a mum of three, I'd been there through that baby phase, 3 times. And, it was like, how can we do this a bit differently? So that's what we did. And we sort of went down the route of trying to get baby food into restaurants, so that when you went and ordered your meal as an adult, as a parent, and then your child's meal, which was always on the agenda, could you order a baby meal alongside that? And we actually got quite some way with that, but for whatever reasons, that business didn't continue with me in quite the way that it could have done. But so I suppose my sort of what I'm coming to is, I really like ideas, doing things differently. And, I could have tried going down that route and, offered support to families. But I think what I was hoping for was something that would be different, would interest me. Would it work? How can I make it work? Does the peer mentor thing work? Does working in schools work? Does it? Yeah, I just like that. I like the concept of doing things slightly differently, a bit quirky. I think it gives me energy, and I'm talking about things. And so just sort of looking at this more generally, just because you're working with families doesn't mean to say you can't do things differently. I think, looking for those little nuggets of where you can do things differently is really interesting. And it certainly gave me that energy in the start. So that's where it sort of came from, is partly having that drive to do things a little bit differently. And also, I guess, just the scale of things. I really wanted to try and make a difference through a school, with not me doing the tutoring and starting off with that. It was never me doing the tutoring, apart from standing in for people sometimes when somebody was ill in the early days. But basically, could I employ a team which would then go into schools and make a difference en masse fairly quickly, as opposed to building up, sort of a lot of parents and families who would work with me and as a tutor and get to know me and build my own personal reputation with it as a maths tutor. I just didn't see that model sort of doing the thing that I wanted to do with Yipiyap, which was, try and reach a lot of people in a fairly short space of time, and deliver things in a different way. So just different. But I think, the lessons of that for me, like I say, are, you can always be looking to how to do things differently, even 13 years down the line as we are now. Look, we just created Peer Scroller. It's something different to bring it. We love this. It's in our DNA as an organization to be looking at things and trying to think of things to do that are just a bit different, and therefore interesting to people, and therefore they open doors and they start conversations, and you can, you're just a bit different from the next people along, I guess. It just gives people something to buy into.
I love that. And I love the baby food idea. I can see that you're very good at spotting kind of opportunities that perhaps other people haven't thought of. I find that really fascinating, and I really commend you for that. It's kind of like a skill that you can't quite learn in a way, because academically, you open I don't know, a business book, it will teach you about gap analysis, but the reality is you also have to have a little bit of a nose for it, and you clearly do. When you got started, how did you actually establish those initial relationships with schools? How did you get in? Because I know a lot of people who sell to schools, and it's that beginning stage they find the hardest, really. What are your top tips? How did you do it?
Okay, well, just to manage expectation, it is probably that first 2.5 years of the business was probably the hardest the hardest single thing I've ever done, is getting from nothing to having something that was viable. So just to say, because obviously I'm happy to share sort of how we've done it and how we do it now. But I think just to sort of to get into context why it's tricky. So you are trying to reach decision makers who have a gazillion people after them all the time, whether it's their own teams, whether it's students, whether it's parents, whether, they are super, super, super busy. So that's the first issue that you have. And there are relatively few of them within school. And there's typically one or two people who could make a decision on what we're talking about, teaching and learning, progress in schools, an achievement lead or something like that. Relatively few people. So you've got that problem to start with. The second thing I would say is that because of how busy they are never at their desk able to take a call, and they have massive inboxes full of things. So standing out is really difficult. So that's tricky. And I think in terms of sort of getting through that, there is really only one way, and that is to be persistent. But there are also creative and innovative ways around trying to do that. So I think in the first place, I made some early contacts when I was just getting the idea up and running, and I had the fortune, I suppose, to just ring in and try and get some heads of maths to give me 10, 15 minutes over lunchtime, just so I could go in and explain to them what I was doing. They were all pretty disappointed with what I had to say when I came in. I'll be really honest about that, because they were hoping for maths resources or different things that they knew and they could sort of factor in, whereas what I was suggesting was something completely random. Tutoring didn't take place in schools in 2012. Certainly peer tutoring would have, was generally laughed out of town as to why we would have 18-year-olds helping support our students when we've got qualified teachers, and all of this. It was I think now, looking back, and other people have said this to me, it was an idea that was perhaps a little bit ahead of its time, if I'm being really honest, because I'm trying to make all these arguments which kind of came to be later. The EEF did research about why peer mentoring works, why small group work works. These things were tried and tested in school. but not until about 2017. So I had 5 years of not having any of that to draw on. So you have to go in and you have to just believe in what you are saying. That's absolutely what I did. And I went, and because of that, I think people thought probably I was a little bit mad, but also they could see that I really believed it. And because I had a teaching background, that kind of held me in good stead. This idea of what I would have liked when I was a teacher, it's absolutely true. I found it really difficult working in groups with large numbers of, very learners who found maths really, really challenging. That is really difficult. And if I'd had a peer tutor with me in the classroom, that would have really helped relieve some of that pressure and some, would really have helped. So I really believed in the concept and being able to go in but getting in front of people is super, super tricky. You have to go, you're either emailing, which they will never give your email address. So, you've got to find that out somehow. Making friends with receptionists is really key because, if you annoy those people, they are the gatekeepers and, you ring up too many times or speak to them in the wrong way, or you're getting frustrated yourself and that comes across and so on. But I remember some people are really, really helpful. You find some receptionists who are so difficult to sort of get, they are absolutely there to turn people like me away. And I get that. I totally get that. But at the same time, you will then find other people who are there in a people-centric industry like education, and they get that human factor. And so sometimes you would just speak to people and a bit of pleading in the early days. I mean, I wasn't proud. It was like, I really need to speak to this person. How do I reach them? And it's kind of almost bringing them into it. I need to reach them. You know how hard they are to reach. How can you help me get the message to them and make it really work? And eventually you get a break, because if you try hard enough, you'll get a break somewhere. And working from that and really nurturing those early relationships. I mean, I still think those schools which were the first ones to say yes and allow me a chance and let me in the door, they are the ones which will always be super special to me. Even if things didn't work out and we're not still working with them now, whatever, I will always have that sense of, when I see the name, I'll be like, oh, they were great. They gave me a chance. They set me going. So that's sort of a real part of it. I think there's a skill which I had to learn. I didn't have this straight away, but a real skill I had to learn in terms of the difference between persistent and being that bit too pushy. Because I think when you do get frustrated, that can come across. I don't want to make it a gender thing, because I think that's a little bit sort of going down the wrong route. But I do think there's sometimes something in that as being a woman trying to push a little bit harder, which sometimes comes across as, a bit too much. I don't want to sort of go too far down that route, but I don't know if other people might have experienced that. So I certainly felt like I experienced that. If I was a man making that call, I might have had a different reaction to it. And, I sometimes wonder that. Obviously, I'll never know. But I think there is definitely a line there where, you really want something to happen, but there's only so far you can push without coming across really not very well at all. So you have to try and sort of have that gut feel as to when that's happening.
How do you mentioned that was a skill? How did you develop that skill, or how do you now identify when it's a little bit too much?
Yeah, I think there's that sort of gut feel and sort of having a bit more of a process around it. So, whatever it is for individuals, but I guess for us, it would be send an email, ring the next day, ring 2 days later, then try email again, go back to, and sort of gently do it, rather than, I think what can sometimes be the case is you're like, especially when you're getting a little bit frustrated by things and, you sort of ring in perhaps 9 in the morning and they say, oh no, they'll be ready around break. And so you try back around break and then they're not ready, try back at 2 o'clock, try back at 3 o'clock, try before the end of the day, and you can feel them on the other end getting a bit sort of, hold on, this is too much. You've rung in 5 times a day. And I think just having that sense of a bit more cool, a bit more calm about it, and spreading your net wide, but just being really organized on who you've spoken to, when, about what, and how far. We are good at that in terms of tracking, what that process has been like. So really doing that. The other thing I would say, which was innovative, I'm not sure I would do it myself now, but it was definitely something that opened doors and gave me confidence in what we did. But it's a little bit random and out there. But every year in around about late September, early October, all schools have an open evening. And I was very cautious about this before landing and trying to do a sales pitch on an open evening. But I think it worked in a couple of cases and it definitely opened doors. So my tip for the top with that is if you do want to go down that route, because my rationale is I'm quite a logical person. So my rationale was, look, you've got a school, you can walk in through the front door and say hello to the people that you are finding it so hard to try and reach over the phone or by email. This is a gift from the gods in some sense that you have the opportunity to do this. You don't have to sort of do anything. It may be a little bit different now. They may sort of require you to book onto it and things like that and so on. But it wasn't the case back in 2012, 2013, that sort of time. You could just walk along to an open evening and just sort of walk in through the door and try and find the head, basically, or assistant head or whoever it is. And I did that a number of times, driving around Manchester, finding the open evenings. Quite often they're on the same night. I remember going to about 3 on the same night and trying to do that. I think my tip from the top with it is if you're going to do that, the best time to head for is right at the very end of the open evening. Everybody is on a high. They've been showing off their school all evening. They've had lovely comments from parents. They're really excited about things and so on. And you can just go in and say, they are quite sort of, up with how proud they are about their own school. And you can just go and say, look, I'm so sorry to drop in on you like this, but, I have been trying to reach one or more of your team for quite some time now. Understand this minute is not necessarily the right moment, but could we perhaps just set up a call for and that then just a very sort of gentle way of just introducing yourself and saying, what it is basically. And more than one occasion, the head said, right, sit down right now and just tell me what it is because, I'm really and they could just sort of go, right, okay, here we go then, 5 minutes, da, 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 da. And if you catch them at that point, that's great. Not earlier in the evening when they're trying to woo the parents and, show off their school and be on duty, if you like. But right at the very, very end, you can do that. And sometimes it just tied in the ends of the ends of the open evenings, sort of were staggered throughout the evening, so I could just do a round robin and go and see people. But it's a bit bonkers, but I say that's what people quite lean into. People like to see people get up and go and do and try and pull out all the stops for what it is they're trying to achieve. And that sort of thing goes a long way. It's a lot more effort than sitting and writing an email or trying to make a phone call through to somebody. It requires you to get up and go out and try and make it happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what I found worked. But as I say, we don't really need to do that in quite that same way now, just because we're more established, a bit of a known name. So slightly different now, but definitely early days. It's a good thing to do.
I love that idea. I do. I was, when I was at school, I was kind of in a role where I was working with suppliers or potential suppliers, and I got contacted quite a lot about kind of new platforms that, people are trying to sell to schools. And I was often on the receiving end of that. And I don't remember anyone really being innovative. I think, if someone had turned up on open evening, I agree with you. At the beginning, you're kind of scrambling around and kind of making sure everything's ready. And although you have lots of energy, there's a bit of nervous energy that, I hope everything goes well. And yes, towards the end, you're tired, but it's been a good day. It's been a good evening. So I think that is the right time. But I think I would have really liked people to take a slightly more innovative approach being on the receiving end of that sales pitch, because it did get to the point where the emails just felt like spam. And if I had the time, I absolutely I would have read them. But often we all know what it's like being a teacher. And if you've got additional responsibility, it's the time. It's, you have to prioritize ruthlessly. So I really love that idea. And, I've had a couple of people on here. I had Karen Gibb from Mind Marvels on here a while ago, and she was talking about cupcakes, giving cupcakes, and, and it had their logo on it, for example, and everyone enjoyed that at break time. And Keris Keneally came on a while ago on the podcast talking about selling to schools, and she really echoed what you were saying about being persistent. She said sometimes you might get in touch with a school, but you actually won't get the business until a year later.
Yeah.
And that's a year of nurturing that relationship and trying to find the right time and working with when the budget comes out and, all of those things. So I really like that idea. Thank you for sharing that.
That's okay.
So you've got the kind of getting into schools side, but then you've also got this recruitment side. Now, recruitment at the best of times is a challenge, but you're working here with young people and people who may change their minds quite fast because their lives are changing quite fast, their situations are changing. How do you recruit in a really robust way so that essentially you're not recruiting tutors who are unreliable?
Yeah, so we've come a long, long journey with this as well. It was very different back in the day. I was trying to persuade some people to come and do this with me, and I was very fortunate. I had two young men who, from one of our local schools, who I managed to sort of connect with, and they both wanted to do it. So that was great. I mean, they must have been absolutely crazy. And to this day, I don't know what their parents must have thought because, I was literally an unknown quantity totally. And I had no business really and no schools that wanted to work with me. And so I'm literally, 40-year-old woman sort of wanting to sort of try and work with these young men to come and come and deliver some tutoring. I'm sure it looked really really dodgy. I'm sure it's not something which might have flown if it's any other way. Things a little bit different. It might have seemed very odd, but it really wasn't. And I got things set up as soon as I could, to be good. And one of the things that I did was offered schools, the first schools that we worked with, because I literally couldn't get anybody to do it without to pay me at the start. I had to prove the concept, and so I literally, sort of had to offer the tutors free of charge for them to go into schools, and then eventually. I was blessed actually. They were both absolutely brilliant, and they totally sold the service and the concept of the service, and they came through. But I suppose when I remember finishing that first year and thinking, I'm never going to find people as good as them again. I was absolutely blessed. They were so good. I just stumbled upon them and they were great. And, we kept in touch long, long, long after that as well. So I think we had the grounding for what good looked like right at the start. So I was very lucky. They didn't let me down. They were both absolutely brilliant. And I worked with them really closely to make sure that they knew exactly what they were doing. They had other friends who kind of were taking the gap year as well, and they came along and joined us. So it wasn't just the three of us. It sort of came to more like five by the end of the first year. Ooh, five people. But then in terms of recruiting going forward, it was sketchy for a little while, I would say. But then we really, and you wouldn't be able to do it now. Schools would not allow it now. It's absolutely something that we would have had to tighten up straight away now. But then it wasn't. And so we, over the years, built up our recruitment process to be what we feel is absolutely gold standard. And so what we do typically is work with sixth form colleges and schools that have a sixth form. We will go and present there. The people who are the sort of senior leaders there know us year on year. They will want us to come and present because they know we offer a good gap year opportunity, and they will invite us in to come and do that. They equally know what we're looking for, so they will know the sorts of people. And the thing is, taking a gap year is such a nebulous thing. You've no idea whether people are going to decide way ahead of time or after their A-level results have come out, or maybe, these it's a long, long, long recruitment window that we have. And so what we do is start the ball rolling, build up these relationships. And so then as and when those students come forward in school to their teachers and say, basically, I'm thinking of taking a gap year, not going to uni next year or doing whatever, I'm thinking of taking a year out, they will say, oh, right, okay, we know this great opportunity for you. And it's that bit that's the key. So, having those good relationships really makes everything run so much smoother in terms of recruitment. And as I say, we know what we're looking for, but then we also have the process of actually the interviewing. So first interview is very straightforward. A lot of it's just explaining what Yipiyap is and finding out whether they might be suitable for it, getting a gut feel. But the key bit, I think, which is really important of our process, is the second interview, because the second interview digs down into the values. And we have, I'll just reach over here, we have an absolutely nutty set of 18 values. There's lots of 3 on there. But the thing about that is, and it is a bit nutty, but it's kind of, again, it's what we do is a bit different. And, what we do is slightly sort of wacky around this. But what it allows us to do is in the second interview, dig down into 2 of those in particular, which are really key, which are consistency So when have you shown you can be consistent? As you say, this is about reliability. So give me an example, and they can prepare ahead of time. Give me an example of when you have shown consistency to something, and that example that they give is often very telling, because if it's always just about studies, it's never very good, really. It needs to be something that above and beyond. When did I do something that I really didn't want to do, didn't have to do, but I stuck with it and I made it work? That's what we're looking for in that bit. And then the other bit is about adaptability. So when have you shown a whatever it takes approach or a can-do attitude, that sort of thing? Are you the sort of person who can handle school life? Because it's, it can be so busy and crazy and things changing at the drop of a hat, and we need you to be able to adapt. So that's that. We also include a section about safeguarding now, and sort of safeguarding information, and a bit of a sort of verbal reassurance that they've understood that. But then the other thing is this values part piece. So we will send over the 18 values ahead of time and ask them to pick out one of the values that they feel really chimes with them, and talk about that and why they think that one's important, why we might think it's important, etc., etc. And all of this sets context for, this is not just a gap year job, getting a job at your local Tesco or in a cafe or in a bar or whatever it is. This is something where we are going to drill you and make sure that your values are the same as our values, at least for this year. You're going to be, you understand what our values are, and you will sort of tie into those, and we want to take those people forward. And you sort of so by the time we've gone through this process of presenting, connecting, talking with their heads of six, picking these two, having these two sets of interviews, then taking up references, then starting, there's a whole sort of little onboarding phase that happens next. We know we're getting the right people, and the young people on the other end of that process understand that it's a much bigger process than, it's not a casual thing. It's something which is really important. We talk about consistency and commitment to the year from the very, very first presentation right the way through to the contracting side of things. And it's a process where this is touched on at all stages. And they know, so that the reliability is all about consistency and supporting schools and students. So it's interesting actually, because I quite often ask when I'm doing the second interviews, have you ever had a teacher that's left mid-year? How did that make you feel? And overwhelmingly, they will have had a teacher that's left mid-year at some point, and not, or they've not taken things seriously, or they felt let down. And having that conversation where they recognise the importance of that, and that we're all open about it. It's not a secret that we want you to stay with us for the full year and be good throughout the whole year, and be effective throughout the whole year. That's when they really get it, and we find we get fantastic young people, and they really do us proud. So yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. I like that you spend a lot of time. I think that's key to robust recruitment, really, is spending the time on more than the logistics,
Yeah.
because you have to have some kind of connection when someone is entering your organization, to at least increase the chances of their commitment and increase the chance of them doing a good job, really.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. And the time we take is really well spent, because
Yeah.
we learn the hard way. We did it before when we weren't spending all that time. And, you get some people who will always be great, but you will equally get some people who they'll turn around later, and, we will have been clear, but nevertheless, not clear enough,
Yeah.
those people. And so therefore, they'll say, well, I didn't realize it was this, there's no way anybody now could say they didn't realize it was the sensible commitment for the whole year. And, and we treat them like young professionals, I think, from the minute they land with us as well. I think that's always been, absolutely key to what we do. Then they're not anything other than young professionals who we want to benefit. And in fact, this is one of the interesting things when we were starting the mission and talking about the mission is, are we a school service provider, or are we a gap year provider? Which one of those two are we? And we came down very much on the school service provision, but we recognize the amount of effort that we need to put in, because they are our ambassadors. They are, like every tuition company, your tutors are your ambassadors. So we have to do what's right for them in order to make them do a great job, happy tutors, great tutors in the workplace, all that sort of thing. And we have a really unique group. So what we do wouldn't apply to other tutoring organisations, but I think the principle applies of, making them feel valued at every stage that you can, and doing as much as you can for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for sharing, being so generous with your knowledge and sharing all of your ideas. I mean, it's really fascinating. I love your story of how it came about and, the way you kind of sought opportunities and you've thought about doing things a little bit differently because you're right. I think there are a lot of people who even now would turn their nose up at an 18-year-old supporting young people academically. But I suppose there is a role that so many different people can play in these young people's lives, and there's a place for everyone. And I suppose you're filling one of those places, aren't you?
Yeah, we definitely feel so. And that message has got a lot easier over time. I think now I can say to schools, everybody knows somebody who would have been a good tutor at this sort of age. If you've got a school with a sixth form, you just imagine those people coming through and coming back in again and helping, supporting.
Yeah,
And that's where we sort of get that recognition now. But it's taken a long time to get the confidence and the credibility to do that.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anne. I've loved having you on the podcast, and it was lovely to meet you in person at the
It
TTA
was.
conference as well.
Thank you
So,
very much.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. That's lovely. Take care.
Would you like to take this discussion further? Perhaps you have some questions or you'd like more ideas on tailoring your business. If so, book a free discovery call through the link in the show notes.